I have a friend named Terry who used to work doing construction of houses. And I don't know how many of you do carpentry or would even begin to try to build a wall, let alone a house. But this was something that he worked with his team to do one bitterly cold winter. And so they poured the foundation, and then it hardened, and after this they built the walls and then added the roof and did all the electrical and the plumbing. And then you can imagine as things were starting to come together, it was pretty exciting to see there used to be no house here, and now there was a house. And through this nasty cold winter, it was starting to get closer to spring as the house was finally coming together. I'm imagining they kind of wish they could button it up beforehand to work inside during the winter, but this was the time frame that they had to do their construction. And so at this point, they're sort of like doing some of the finishing touches, finishing the drywall, adding trim and paint and lighting and things like this. And spring weather arrives, and it's the beauty of the flowers and the green grass and this new wonderful house. So they come to work the next morning to continue their work finishing up this house, and they see a crack in the wall. And it's really a big crack. But it's not that big of a deal, right? They know how to make houses, so a little bit of spackling over top of that crack, and they'll be just fine. But there was another crack, and what they realized was that there were cracks everywhere. Yesterday there wasn't, but today cracks all over this entire house. So what had happened? Well, it wasn't something that was wrong with the construction of the walls. There was nothing wrong with the drywall itself or the electrical or the plumbing. What had gone wrong was when they poured that foundation in the bitter cold of the winter, the foundation got hard, but not because it had dried. It got hard because it was frozen. So they built the house on a frozen foundation. Then spring weather came, and what was frozen became liquid again, and the whole house started cracking its way back down. Imagine if they were to just put spackling over top of those cracks. Would it fix the problem? Even if they're really, really good at drywall, that is not going to take care of the problem that they had with that particular house they were building. The issue, the problem at hand, was a foundational concern. And I think of that story because what I want to give you today is foundational. It's something that I think is at the very base of a lot of the things that I'm trying to teach you in this sermon series about hearing from God. And so I want to talk with you about this idea that is just as important as the foundation of a house. The other things in the house are important. The other things we talk about, the way that we listen to God, they're important. But if you don't get this part right, then all the rest of it is just going to crumble and fall apart. That's how important this is. One of the principles that I've noticed in my reflection and study of how to hear from God centers around this idea that God very thankfully uses a variety of means of communication. So it's not only one method. Husbands, imagine if the only way that your wife ever talked to you was with her voice, and she never gave you that look. You know what look I'm talking about, right? Okay? Or if you've seen it from somebody, right? So there are all different kinds of communication that we have. Well, God does the same thing. When I leave a note for my kids on the table and I say, hey, take out the trash and make sure that you walk the dog, they never hear my voice say, take out the trash, walk the dog. But my kids know that that written note is a means of communication from me to them. That's the word of Dad from on high, not from on high. But it's written communication. God does this with us as well. He also uses messengers. We talked a little bit about that a week ago when we talked about Jeremiah, one of God's messengers we call prophets. One of the ways that God communicates to us beyond just words, strangely enough, is our conscience. Our conscience. You know that feeling you get inside where you realize an activity is not right. Even though nobody ever told you that it was wrong, you can feel inside, ooh, that's not the right thing for me to do. That conscience comes from God. That's part of the way that he communicates to us. Another way he communicates with people is through dreams. And we see several occurrences of this in the Bible where someone would have a dream, not just because they ate something funny before bed like Ebenezer Scrooge, but because God was actually communicating to them through that dream. frustrating thing to me about that is I can't choose to have a dream. I certainly can't choose to have a dream from God. I don't control that. So if God is to communicate to you or to me through a dream, that's up to him, really. He would choose to do that, and then I would be a recipient of the dream in that sense. And then I wonder if you're at all like me. Have you ever felt close to God when you were out in nature? Anybody like that? Yeah, look at the hands. Yeah. Something about being in nature resonates with us differently than when we're inside of a building, when we're inside of some place that's hopefully been constructed better than what my friend Terry was constructing. When we're outside, I've done this before, and there's occurrences of this in God's Word as well, that God will interact with and communicate with people when they're out in nature. In fact, the Bible even says, the heavens declare the glory of God, the skies proclaim the works of his hands. Day after day, they pour forth speech. Their voice, we're talking about nature, their voice goes out into all the earth, their words to the ends of the world. So we can see and we can hear God through nature. Unfortunately, I feel like that kind of communication is really limited. Because if you want to hear from God about some concern, you want to hear from God about some decision that you're trying to make, you need to hear from God, then if the way that he's communicating to you is through nature, it's good and it's true, and he does communicate to us through nature. But beyond oh yeah, God exists and he created everything that I'm seeing here, that communication can feel really limited. I need to know God exists. We need to know that God created everything around us. That influences our thinking, our decisions, our understanding of ourselves, but that's a limited means of communication. So it feels less helpful to me. I still love it. I love being out in nature and getting close with God, but I want more. I want to be able to really hear from God, especially when I'm trying to make a tough decision or plans for the future or to find an answer to a difficult question. So what is it that we can do? I keep coming back to this question. What can we do in order to hear better from God? We can't force him to talk. Remember I said he's not a puppet. I can't make God talk any more than I can make you talk. I can make myself a better listener, but I can't force him to talk. So how do I become a better listener? And that's a lot of what we're talking about today and in the weeks to come as I will continue through this series. This foundational idea that I'm going to give you today, if we don't get this foundation right, then a lot of those other pieces that I will share with you, they'll just crack, they'll crumble, they won't work. So take a Bible, yours, or borrow one nearby you, or if you're stronger than the person next to you, you can snag theirs. Turn to John 8. I want to look at John 8 with you. John 8's a little bit more than 3/4 of the way through the Bible as a whole. You'll find Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, Acts, Romans, Corinthians. You're looking for John. And we're going to be in chapter 8. We'll look there in just a minute. In this paragraph that I want to show you here in just a moment, Jesus is having a conversation with some Jews. So there are a few simple things that we know about the Jews. Back in the day, God had established them as a people, as a nation, for a purpose. God wanted to bring blessing to the whole world, to everybody, to you and to me. And he was going to choose to do that through a group of representatives, through the people of that nation, through the Jews. And they had their ups and their downs, and before we look down our noses at them, we should remember we have our ups and our downs too, right? But here Jesus is having this conversation with some Jewish people here in John 8. And I want you to see this with me. So look at starting in verse 31. John 8, starting in verse 31. To the Jews who had believed in him, Jesus said, "If you hold to my teaching," that means if you do the things I teach you to do, if you hold to my teaching, you are really my disciples. Then you will know the truth, and the truth will set you free. They answered him, "We're Abraham's descendants and have never been slaves to anyone." Can you see their line of thinking? He said, if you do the things I teach you to do, you're going to have this truth from God, and the truth is going to set you free. And they're like, wait a minute, free? We're not slaves. Why are you saying free? Set us free. We've never been slaves to anybody. You must not realize who you're talking to. We're Jews. We're descendants of Abraham. We're not a group of people who are slaves to someone here. We're Abraham's descendants and have never been slaves to anyone. How can you say that we shall be set free? Verse 34, Jesus replied, "Very truly I tell you, everyone who sins is a slave to sin? I'm not going to, but if I were to ask for anyone who is a sinner to raise their hand, if we were all being honest, all of us would raise our hand. Right? I mean, when you reflect upon yourself, you might be able to fool plenty of others around you into thinking, you're doing all right. But we all know at some point in our lives, and for some of us at many points in our lives, we have messed up royally. We have turned away from God. We have not done the things that God has asked for us to do. The Bible calls that sin, when we turn away from what God has asked for us to do. And here Jesus is telling us, very truly, this is verse 34, very truly I tell you, everyone who sins, that's us, okay, that's you and me, is a slave to sin. He said, the truth is going to set you free. And they're like, wait a minute, we've never been slaves. We're Jews. We're Abraham's descendants. What do you mean set free? And he says, anybody who has sinned is a slave to sin. That's a tough idea for me, because when I think about slavery, a number of images come to my mind. As I figured probably some of those images come to your mind too. Well, I think about slavery that took place in our nation in the past, when I think about some slavery that's taking place in our world even yet today, and those images kind of creep in and like, well, but that's not what I'm experiencing. I'm not in shackles. I'm not being forced to work without pay. I'm not being mistreated as if I am less than human. So slave, this idea of slavery, it's not the same as what we might think of when you reflect on slavery that's taken place in our nation. But it is most certainly connected with this idea of being controlled by a master and having no choice in what it is that I'm going to do about it. If I am a slave, if you are a slave, and we are slaves to sin, there is a sense in which we have no say in the matter. You ever face temptation and fall, and then later you face the same temptation and fall into sin, and then later you face the same temptation, and you're like, why do I keep doing this? I don't want to keep coming back to this. I wish that I wouldn't sin that way anymore. And so you make this decision, like, I'm going to be better. I'm going to choose to obey. But then the temptation, has this happened to you? The temptation comes again and you just end up falling right back into sin. I'm not alone, am I? No, okay. All right. This is the human experience for us. The reason for that is because we are slaves. This is the way that God describes us in relationship to sin. Sin becomes like a master. And when it comes calling, then for those who are slaves to it, they have no choice but to do what their master commands. This is miserable. Not the kind of existence that any of us want. Look a little further there with me. And Jesus said in verse 34, very truly I tell you, everyone who sins is a slave to sin. Verse 35. Now a slave has no permanent place in a family, but a son belongs to it forever. So we're talking about family here. Verse 36, if the Son sets you free, you will be free indeed. Verse 37, I know that you're Abraham's descendants. Okay, this is what Jesus is saying to the Jews. He's not confused about who he's talking to. I know you guys are Jews. I know you're descendants of Abraham. I know that you're not slaves to somebody. I'm not talking about that kind of slavery. He said, I know that you are Abraham's descendants. Yet, he said, you are looking for a way to kill me, Jesus said, because you have no room for my word. And here is one of many connections between this paragraph and how we're going to hear from God. These people that he was talking with, these people who were chosen by God and established as a religious group, as a nation, as a group of people to bring spiritual blessing to the whole world, these people, he said, you have no room for my word. Right there in verse 37. Let's keep reading in verse 38. I'm telling you what I have seen in my Father's presence, and you are doing what you have heard from your father. Now, what we may not realize, because we're reading this in English, is there's kind of a loose use of the word father here. It can equally be translated father or ancestor. How many of you have heard of Jesus referred to as the son of David? Anybody heard that phrase before? Jesus, son of... Okay, nodding heads, raising hands. You've heard of that phrase before. What was Jesus' adoptive dad's name? Joseph. It wasn't David. So when we say son of, it can equally mean descendant of. And when we say someone is my father, it could equally mean someone is my ancestor. So here when he's saying, you've been doing what you have heard from your father, he's talking to an entire group of Jews, and they see themselves as descendants of, or sons of, Abraham. And he's saying, you've been doing these activities, what you've heard from your father. So in their minds, they're thinking about their ancestor Abraham here. And they say in verse 39, Abraham is our father, or we could say Abraham is our ancestor, they answered. If you were Abraham's children, said Jesus, then you would do what Abraham did. As it is, you're looking for a way to kill me, a man who has told you the truth that I heard from God. Abraham did no such things. You are doing the works of your own father. So we kind of have this back and forth between Jesus and this group of people. And he's saying, you guys, you claim to be descendants of Abraham. You claim to be this group of people that God is using to bring blessings to the whole world. But you've got no room for my word. I would say stuff to you. I would bring to you the word of God, but there's no room for it. Why? Because you keep doing what your father has led you to do. And they're like, well, but our father's Abraham. And Abraham, we call him the father of the faith. This great guy, this leader in the Old Testament, he didn't do everything right. So if you're thinking he's all that great, go back and read about his life. He had his bumps along the road too. Okay, but we look up to him. They looked up to him as a hero, as the one who established their people group. And he's saying, you're doing the works of your own father, while he's also saying, you guys are trying to kill me. That doesn't sound like Abraham. That doesn't sound like something Abraham would do. And they say this, partway through verse 41. We're not illegitimate children, they protested. The only father we have is, who is it? Do you see it there near the end of verse 41? God. The only father we have is God himself. So they're starting to catch on that when Jesus is talking about their father, their ancestors, he doesn't mean literally. He's not talking about their ethnic descent. He's talking metaphorically about their father, the person who is the one who is leading them, the person who is controlling them, the one who is their master and they are slaves to. And they're saying, we're not illegitimate children. We really are Jews. We really are descendants of Abraham, they protested. The only father that we have is God himself. And then verse 42, see this with me. Jesus said to them, if God were your father, you would love me, for I have come here from God. I have not come on my own. God sent me. Verse 43, why is my language not clear to you? Oh boy. When I want to hear from God, sometimes I don't get what he's telling me. Sometimes he might be saying it plain as day, but Ding Dong Steve does not understand it. And he says right here, my language is not clear to you. Why is that? He answers his own question partway through verse 43. Why is my language not clear to you? Because you are unable to hear what I say. I want you to use a pen or a pencil or any writing utensil that you have and underline that phrase right there. Even if it's a pew Bible, go ahead and do it. I know the pastor, you won't get in trouble. You are unable to hear what I say. Underline that right there. You are unable to hear what I say. This is the reason why what I'm talking to you about today is so foundational. We can come up with all kinds of techniques for trying to be better listeners. We can practice things to try to increase the chances of us to be able to hear from God. But if we fall into the category that those people do, and we'll talk about what that is, if we fall into that category, then we will not be able to hear what he says. That's foundational. There's no chance that you're going to hear from God if you fall into this category. So that's why I want you to underline that at the end of verse 43. You are unable to hear what I say. That's how we are sometimes. So they continue with this back and forth about who's your father? Is it Abraham? Is it God? Is it someone else? He's having this conversation with them, and he's describing to them how they are a part of a family, but it is not a family where they're doing what God has asked them to do. They are a part of a spiritual family, but it is not the family where they are free to live in the grace that comes from God. They're a part of a family, but they're not bringing the blessing to the ends of the earth the way that God established that family to be, and they are unable to hear what God says. Look at verse 44 there. Jesus said, "You belong to your father." Who did he say their father was? The devil. The devil. Jesus didn't pull any punches, did he? If I was going to tell somebody, I don't think that you're saved, I might come a little more gently in the conversation than that. You really need Jesus. That's a whole lot different than your father is the devil. Sounds like something Medea would say. You belong to your father, the devil, and you want to carry out your father, the devil's, desires. He was a murderer from the beginning, not holding to the truth, for there is no truth in him. When he lies, we're talking about the devil, when he lies, he speaks his native language, for he is a liar and the father of lies. Yet, because I speak the truth, you do not believe me. Can any of you prove me guilty of sin? If I'm telling the truth, why don't you believe me? So, they were descendants of Abraham, but because of this family association that they had, not with the people of God, but with the devil, that meant that even though ethnically they were Jewish, they weren't living as the people of God. Even though they would claim, oh, God is our Father. He's the one who established us as a people group. We could say it as a church, right? God is our Father. He's the one who established the church. But they weren't living as part of the family of God here. They were living as a part of another family. They had a different master, someone else who controlled them. That was the devil. Look at verse 47. Jesus is still speaking here. And in verse 47, he says, whoever belongs to God, there's an important phrase right there. Whoever belongs to God hears what God says. I've asked you every Sunday, weekly, do you want to hear from God? And I've seen you nod your heads or vocally answer yes. I've seen you raise your hands and say, I need or I want to hear from God. Right here, whoever belongs to God hears what he says. And then he says, the reason you do not hear is that you do not belong to God. Now, I'm fully aware of where I am right now. I'm fully aware of who's in the room and most of the people who are watching the video. I'm not confused about that. And I'm not trying to insult anyone. So if you're thinking like, well, what are you accusing me of? Okay, time out. We'll talk a little bit more about this here. The people to whom Jesus was speaking were a lot like us. They were religious people. They were people who went to the place of worship. They were people who sung the worship songs. They were people who prayed the prayers and dressed up in their clothing that the other religious people would say, oh yeah, okay, you look good, you look ready for worship. These were people who did all of these types of things, but Jesus said that their religious rituals did not mean that they belonged to God. Remember what I said earlier about how anybody can come and sit in the room? Right? Anybody. You don't have to even believe in God to show up here and sit down on one of these seats. You don't have to even trust or follow Jesus or call yourself a Christian in order to watch one of the videos or to even sing along here. Now, I hope that you will. I hope that you will belong to God and that you will trust in Jesus and follow him. But there's no guard at the door stopping people saying, no, you're going to have to prove yourself before we let you in. That's not how the church works. And when it does work that way, it's broken. The church is never supposed to be like that. We should always be welcoming people. Not that we are happy with the fact that they have sin in their life, but that we are happy that they have chosen to come and be near the people of God, to listen to the word of God proclaimed, to be surrounded by people who are going to demonstrate love and grace to them, that they're going to hear and maybe even sing along with some songs that will teach them truths about God and truths about themselves as we are teaching each other when we sing together as a church. This is what I hope for people who don't yet believe in God, who don't yet belong to God, that they would come near to you and near to me, near to the church, so that they can take another step, take another step, and take another step until finally they do belong to God, until finally they do belong to the family of God. And when I hear this paragraph, I know it's natural for a lot of church people to think, okay, well, I'm good. This doesn't super apply to me because I already belong to God, and so that's fine. But I don't want you to tune out, and here's why. 2 reasons. First, they thought what Jesus was saying didn't apply to them, so maybe we think it doesn't apply to us when it does. So let's humble ourselves and listen. Secondly, even if you do belong to God, you know somebody who doesn't. You know somebody who doesn't know Jesus. Maybe they know about him, but they don't follow him. He doesn't live within. He's not the master of their life. You know somebody who is far from God. Maybe it's even a person who's quite religious, a person who shows up with the churchy things, but yet that person that you know that you're thinking of, they don't belong to God. So even if you do, I want you to hear what Jesus is saying here in this text and listen on behalf of that person, that you might be able to share this foundational truth with your own heart and with that person as well. In life, every single one of us faces temptation. It's an unfortunate truth, one that I don't like. And when that temptation comes, it looks a little bit different for you than it does for me. The things that tempt you most may be similar or may be quite different than the things that tempt me most. But all of us, including me, face temptation. All of us have a spiritual enemy. The idea of Satan, the devil, the enemy of our souls, the father of lies, whatever title you want to give to him, we're talking about that person. He's not just an idea. He is a real person, and he hates us. He hates you so much, he wants to ruin you and destroy your life and leave you dead. That is his goal. That's how Satan feels about you. We live in a fallen world. I mean, look around at things. You don't even have to turn on the news to see how broken things are, how messed up stuff is. And I'm not just talking about things on the other side of the planet. Even here, you go to work, you interact with some of your neighbors, sometimes even in our own families, there is a brokenness in the system around us. This is the environment in which we live. Our spiritual enemy, our sinful world, and we also have this nature to sin that is within every single one of us, in you and in me. It is natural for us to sin. Just like it is natural for an apple tree to grow apples, it is natural for you and me to grow sin. That's how we are. I don't like it, but this is the way that God describes us as a warning about the massive problem that we face. Part of the reason this is so problematic, I want to make sure that you hear this, so don't tune out, is the destination of sin. The reason why this is so problematic for you and for me is because sin only has one destination. I've mentioned it a couple times over the last few months. Do you remember what it is? Sin only has one destination. It's death. That's it. Sin is taking you somewhere, and it always goes to the same place. Sin only has one destination. It's death. What can a dead person do to fix the problem of their death? What's that you say? Yeah, there's the full list of it, right? What can a dead person do to fix the problem of their death? Nothing. Nothing. If you're dead, there is nothing you could do to fix the problem of your death. God is the only creator of life. Anywhere. Ever. And sin is anything that separates us from God. So we can make a list of things, don't do these things, or yes, do these good things. And we can have these lists, and sometimes these lists, these rules, these commands are helpful for us to be able to figure out, okay, like, am I doing the right thing or am I not doing the right thing? But because of that broken system that we live in, and because of that nature to sin that is within every human being, we find ways to technically follow the rules, but still do the thing that we shouldn't be doing, and then we end up being separated from God because it's still sin. Even though, like, well, he said don't lie, but I didn't actually lie. I said truthful things. I just led the person to believe something that isn't true. That's lying. I didn't really steal because, like, I kind of own things around here, and so it's all right because I'm a contributor, and it's something small, so it's no big deal. And so I didn't really we bend the rules, right? And so every single one of us has this reality in us. Sometimes little white lies, sometimes little bending of the rules, sometimes great, big, huge sins that embarrass us, things that we want to keep secret because we know if other people find out, we're going to feel terrible. We're going to feel shame or guilt or unworthy or embarrassed, whatever the case may be. And even though there's a short list of people in our congregation who are murderers, I'm hoping that's a really short list, we know that you and me have, at some point in our lives, sinned. And that sin takes us to one destination. What is it? Death. All of us. Sin took us to death. What can a dead person do to fix that? What can you and I as dead people do to fix the problem of our sin and death? Nothing. Can you see how big of a problem this is? Jesus said, that's why you don't hear from God. If you belonged to his family, you could hear from him. If you belong to God, you could hear from him. But you guys, and this includes me if I motion like this, he's like, all you guys are dead because you belong to the devil, because you have sinned. And he wasn't looking down his nose and pointing his finger and saying, shame on you. I'm not doing that either. I'm saying this is the condition of humanity here. Oh, but wait, Steve, I'm a good person. I've done a lot of great things in my life. I've given charitably. I've spent time. I've helped people in need. I've even been sacrificial. Come on, Steve. I've done a lot of really good things. You might be thinking to yourself, all these good things that are in your life. Imagine being in a courtroom and talking with a judge, and you know that you're guilty of some crime, and the punishment for that crime is death. You know you're guilty, and you know the punishment is death, but you say to the judge, oh, but yeah, I've done a lot of really good things in my life. I've given charitably. I've sacrificed. I've spent time. I've helped. I've done a lot more good than I have evil. Do you think that judge is going to look at you and say, okay, I guess you've done a lot of good things, so then we'll just let you off the hook? Is that how it works? No. That's not how it works with God either. There isn't any amount of good that we can do that will outweigh the bad. This is a thinking that is common among so many people, even some people in the church. But that is a lie from our enemy, the devil. The devil wants you to believe that lie because he knows it's not true, and as long as you believe it, it will lead you to more sin, to more death. You cannot do enough good to earn your way to belong to God. Why? Because sin leads to death. And there is nothing a dead person can do to fix the problem of their death. Have you always, in every circumstance for your entire life, told the truth? Anybody? Anybody? No hands went up? Or if you did, you're like, no, I'm not walking to that trap. What do we call somebody who doesn't speak the truth? If you haven't always spoken the truth in every circumstance for your entire life, what are you? Okay. Anybody in the room ever stolen something? Taken something that doesn't belong to you, big or small? Anybody ever stolen something? What do we call a person who steals things from others? Thief? Okay. If you have ever stolen something from somebody, then what would we call you? A thief. So, I don't think that's right though, James. I think we'd call you a lion thief. That's Lion, lying. Thank you for helping me to enunciate clearly. Ultimately, it doesn't matter which sin we're talking about. Every single one of us and every single person that we've ever met or ever will meet has sin, and that sin leads to death. We need someone who is alive to fix that problem for us. I can't fix my sin and death because sin makes me dead. You cannot fix your sin and death. because sin makes you dead. That person you know who doesn't know Jesus, doesn't believe in God, doesn't belong to the family of God, that person that you care for and you want good things for them, they cannot fix the problem of their sin and death because they're dead. It's the same for every single one of us. We need someone who is alive to fix the problem for us. And not just alive, we need someone who is alive and who doesn't have sin. Because if they had sin, that would make them dead and that would make them not alive. Do you get where I'm going? Okay, we need someone who is alive and free of sin, sinless. Does anyone come to mind when I'm describing someone who is alive and has no sin? It's Jesus. It's Jesus. Jesus Christ. That is why he said, "Very truly I tell you, whoever hears my word and believes in him who sent me has eternal life." Listen to what Jesus is saying. Whoever hears my word and believes in him who sent me has eternal life and will not be judged, but has crossed over from death to life. Very truly I tell you, a time is coming and has now come when the dead, that's us, a time is coming and has now come when the dead will hear the voice of the Son of God, and those who hear will live. Can you see how important this is? How foundational this is for us to ever hope to hear from God? There's good news for you and for me. Dead people can become living again because of the Creator of life. That's God. Because of what Jesus did for you and for me. When he went to the cross to pay the penalty for sin, it wasn't his sin. It was yours and mine. When he hung on that cross and died, that wasn't his cross. It was yours and mine. And on the third day, when he conquered death and sin, when he came to life again, he offers to you and to me that same resurrection. Because while you and I were dead because of our sin, just as he was dead because he died on that cross, he rose to life again, and so can you and I. We can have what he calls a new birth, a resurrected life, a new life. And you know what happens when I have a new life and I'm not the same old person who was dead anymore, that person who was a slave to sin? When sin comes calling, we call that temptation. When sin comes calling, it's not calling on me anymore. It's calling on that dead guy. When that temptation comes to you, that same temptation that you've faced and failed over and over again, when it comes to you, it's not calling you. It's calling that dead person. And God has offered to make you into a new creation. Not just to forgive you and wipe your slate clean and say, well, you're still the same screwed up person that you were before. No, that's not the gospel. The good news of Jesus Christ is that you and I and every person that we know can be new and alive again in Jesus Christ. This is a foundational truth. If you want or need to hear from God, and many of us have said, yes, I want to or I need to hear from God, then you need spiritual resurrection. You need to be spiritually reborn. And if you're not, then you're dead. I don't say that looking down at you. I don't say that in a judgmental way. I say that in a very deeply concerned way, out of love, because that's what sin does to us. If you have not been spiritually resurrected, you're dead. This either applies to you or to someone that you know. Someone who is still dead in their sin, and they desperately need to belong to God. Dead people are not good listeners. They can't hear anything. Their ears don't work. Jesus said the reason you do not hear is because you do not belong to God. Do you? Do you belong to God? Be honest with yourself. God knows. We can't fool him. Do you belong to him? Those Jews thought they did, but Jesus very clearly said that they did not. He described them as belonging to the devil. He described them as dead, unable to hear. I want you to hear from God. I want you, more importantly, to get this foundation right. Even if you never have that moment in your life, that day in your life where, oh, I heard that voice, or I felt that touch, or I had that experience. Even if you never have that moment where you're like, yeah, God said this phrase to me or this paragraph, even if you never have that, I desperately want you to get this foundation right. You must belong to God. Belong to God. Would you pray with me? Band, come on back up if you would, please. Father, I'm thankful for the new life that you've given to me and to my brothers and sisters. I'm thankful for the path that you have made so that we might escape our spiritual enemy and so that we might survive this broken world and so that sin nature in us can die when you give to us a new nature, when your Spirit lives within us and gives us a new life and a new hope. Father, I want to humble myself before you, not just to assume that everything is fine, but to say desperately, I need you. Creator and sustainer of life, I need you. And for those who are listening to this word proclaimed this morning, who are realizing now that they don't yet belong to God, Father, draw them near to you. Awaken their souls. Give them that new life that Jesus offers when we place our faith in him. We come near to you, Father. We draw near to you because of what Jesus did for us. You are so good. We worship you and we love you. Amen. May we belong to the one good Father, the creator of life, the sustainer of the universe. May we live again because of the life, death, and resurrection of his Son, Jesus Christ. May we hear from him, listening to his voice, the voice of our Father God. And may we carry this message of hope, of new life, to those who are still dead in their sin. Amen.